I've been thinking about this for a long time, about when to tell this story, how to tell it, if I should even tell it at all. Because the truth is messy. And I built a career on stories, on narratives that have beginnings and middles and endings that make sense, that teach us something. But this one still stings. Even now, even after all this time. I remember exactly where I was when everything started to unravel. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I was sitting in my car, not even my car really, but a leased BMW that I couldn't afford, that was bleeding my bank account dry every single month. And I was staring at my phone. The screen was bright against the gray interior, and there was a text from Melissa. That was her name, Melissa. And the text said, "Can't wait to see the lake house this weekend." And I just sat there, feeling my chest tighten, feeling this cold sweat break out across my back, because there was no lake house. There never was. Let me back up. Let me back up because I need you to understand how I got there, how a 32-year-old man, a grown man who should have known better, ended up constructing an entire fictional life like some kind of desperate con artist in a movie. But here's the thing that I've learned. We don't make these choices in one big moment. We make them in 1,000 tiny moments, little compromises with ourselves that seem harmless until suddenly you're drowning and you can't remember when you stop being able to touch the bottom. I met Melissa at a fundraiser in Manhattan. This was about 8 months before that Tuesday in October. I was there because my friend Marcus, you might know Marcus Whitfield, the playwright, he had dragged me along because I'd been in a bit of a slump. My second book hadn't done as well as the first. Not terrible, you understand, but not what everyone expected. And in publishing, in this industry, expectations are everything. They're the water you swim in. And when you don't meet them, people start looking past you, through you, like you're already fading. So I was at this fundraiser, nursing a whiskey that cost more than my dinner probably should have. And I was trying to look like I belonged there. You know that feeling? When you're somewhere and everyone seems so comfortable, so at ease, and you're just performing? That was me. Black tie that I'd owned for 6 years, shoes that I'd polished that morning to hide the scuffs, and this constant low-grade anxiety that someone would ask me what I was working on, and I'd have to admit that I was stuck, that I was scared, that I was beginning to wonder if the first book was a fluke. And then I saw her across the room. Melissa. She was wearing this deep green dress, emerald maybe, and she was laughing at something someone said, and there was this light around her. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like something out of one of my books, but I swear that's how it felt. Like she had this gravity that pulled at something in my chest. Marcus noticed me staring. He leaned in. I can still smell his cologne, something expensive and woody. And he said, "That's Melissa Chin. Venture capital. Smart as hell. Way out of your league." And he laughed. That friendly ribbing kind of laugh, but I felt it like a challenge. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was the fact that I'd spent 3 months barely leaving my apartment, barely writing, barely existing. Maybe I just wanted to feel like someone else for a night. But I walked over to her, and when she turned and smiled at me, when she smiled at me, I introduced myself, and she said, "Oh, I loved your first book. The one about the lighthouse keeper? It made me cry on a plane. Very embarrassing." And just like that, I was hooked. We talked for 2 hours. 2 hours where I was funny and charming and confident. Where I told stories about my life that were enhanced. That's the word I used to myself. Enhanced. Not lies. Not yet. Just enhanced. I told her about the time I met Margaret Atwood at a dinner party. True. But I maybe made sound like Margaret and I were closer than we were. Like we'd had this deep conversation about craft when really she'd just been polite to a nervous young writer for 15 minutes. I told her about my travels. Also true. But I made the trip to Portland sound like I'd stayed at the Heathman when really I'd crashed on my friend's couch. Little things. Little adjustments to make myself sound more successful, more established, more worthy of talking to someone like her. And it worked. God help me, it worked. She gave me her number. We started texting, then dating. And somewhere in those first few weeks, somewhere between the second date and the fifth, the enhancements became inventions. She mentioned she loved sailing. I said I had a friend with a boat. I didn't. She talked about spending summers in the Hamptons, and I nodded along like I knew what that was like when the closest I'd gotten to the Hamptons was reading about them. She asked where I lived, and instead of telling her about my one bedroom in Queens with a radiator that clanked all night and the neighbors who fought at 2 in the morning, I gave her the address of a building in Brooklyn Heights that I'd walked past once and thought, someday. You have to understand, I didn't plan this. I didn't sit down and think, I'm going to construct an elaborate lie. It happened the way water finds cracks in concrete, slowly, naturally, following the path of least resistance. Every time I had a chance to tell the truth, I'd see her face, excited, impressed, happy, and I'd think, just a little longer, just until I'm actually successful enough that it won't matter. I told myself I was protecting something fragile and new. I told myself that once my career turned around, once the third book was a hit, I'd come clean and we'd laugh about it. I told myself a lot of things in those early months. The BMW came first. My Honda Civic was reliable, paid off, but it had 160,000 miles on it and a stain on the passenger seat that wouldn't come out no matter what I tried. Melissa had mentioned casually that she thought BMWs were sexy, not in a materialistic way, just, an observation. And I found myself at a dealership 2 days later, signing a lease I couldn't afford because the salesman kept saying low monthly payments like that somehow changed the math of my rapidly depleting savings account. $399 a month. That's what I agreed to. And I remember driving off the lot thinking, this is fine. This is an investment. This will make everything easier. But what I actually felt under the momentary thrill, was this sick churning in my stomach. This knowing that I just made a mistake I couldn't take back. Then came the restaurants. Melissa was used to nice places. Not show off and nice, just nice. The kind of places where the waiter describes the specials in hushed, reverent tones, and the wine list is leather-bound. And I couldn't take her to the Thai place in Queens where I usually ate, where they knew my order and gave me extra spring rolls because I was a regular. So we went to Gramercy Tavern, to Daniel, to places where the bill made my palms sweat and my credit card feel like it might actually catch fire when I handed it over. $400 for dinner. $600. Once $875 when we went with her friends, and I insisted on picking up the check because that's what a successful author would do, right? That's what someone confident and established would do. I started getting good at the quick calculation, the mental math of how much was left on this card, whether that charge would go through, whether I should use the Visa or the MasterCard or the Amex that I'd opened specifically for this sinking ship of a lifestyle. I became intimate with my credit card apps, checking them compulsively in bathrooms at restaurants in my car before going to meet her, late at night when I couldn't sleep, because my brain was just adding and subtracting. My friend Jennifer Santos, the journalist, some of you might know her work, she tried to warn me. We met for coffee in July, and I made the mistake of telling her about Melissa, about how great things were going. And Jennifer just looked at me with these sad, knowing eyes and said, Michael, you look exhausted. You look like you're running a race you can't win. And I laughed it off. I said, I'm fine, Jen. I'm happy. Don't I look happy? And she stirred her coffee slowly, not looking at me, and said, you look like you're drowning. But I didn't listen. I didn't listen because I couldn't afford to listen. The lie had momentum now. It had weight and shape and too many supporting lies propping it up. Melissa thought I lived in Brooklyn Heights, so I'd sometimes drive there and park near my building before she'd meet me. She thought I was working on a major book deal. So I'd invented an editor named Patricia who was very excited about my new manuscript, a manuscript that barely existed beyond 30 pages of notes and false starts. The lake house was my biggest invention. We'd been dating for 4 months when her best friend got engaged, and Melissa was talking about how nice it would be to get away, to have a quiet weekend somewhere beautiful. And I heard myself say, well, I have a place upstate, on a lake. It's pretty modest, but the view is incredible. I don't know why I said it. I swear to you, I don't know. It just came out like my mouth was working independently of my brain. And then it was out there in the world, and she was excited, so excited, already planning when we could go. And I was nodding and smiling and internally screaming. That night, I went home to my actual home in Queens, and I sat on my couch in the dark for 3 hours. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbors fought. A siren wailed past on the street below. And I thought about how I got near, how I'd let this happen. And I couldn't find the moment where I could have stopped it. It all seemed inevitable, like dominoes that had started falling months ago, and I was just watching them go. I looked up lake houses for rent. I found one that I could afford for a weekend barely, on Airbnb. $1,000 for 2 nights. $1,000 I didn't have. But what choice did I have? Tell her the truth? Watch her face change Has she realized what I was? Watch her walk away? So I booked it. And I added another $1,000 to the credit card debt that was now approaching $38,000. $38,000 for a life I didn't have, for a person I wasn't. The week before we were supposed to go to the lake house, Melissa's mother came to visit from California. Melissa wanted me to meet her, wanted us all to have dinner together. And I couldn't think of a good excuse to say no. So we met at this Italian place in the West Village, and I ordered wine I couldn't afford and made conversation about books and travel, and I felt her mother watching me, really watching me, the way mothers do when they're trying to figure out if you're good enough for their daughter. At one point, Melissa went to the bathroom, and her mother, Linda, her name was Linda, leaned forward and said very quietly, "My daughter speaks very highly of you. I hope you're as wonderful as she thinks you are." And there was something in her voice, some warning or test. And I said, "I hope so too, Mrs. Chin. I really do." After dinner, I drove home in the BMW that wasn't really mine, past a building in Brooklyn Heights that I didn't really live in, back to Queens where my real life was waiting. Bills on the counter, rejection letters from literary magazines, the silence of a small apartment that was starting to feel like a prison. I poured myself a drink. Cheap whiskey, not the good stuff I pretended to prefer. And I opened my laptop and I looked at my bank statements, really looked at them for the first time in weeks. Checking account, $742. Savings account, $1,203. Credit card 1, $18,000 for 100 in debt. Credit card 2, $11,600. Credit card 3, $8,200. Total credit card debt, $38,200. Monthly income from writing, inconsistent, averaging maybe $3,000 when royalties came in. Monthly expenses before Melissa, $2,800. Monthly expenses after Melissa, $6,400. The numbers didn't work. They couldn't work. They would never work. I was spending more than twice what I made, and I'd been doing it for months, and I'd maxed out my ability to open new credit cards. And the lake house weekend was going to cost $1,500 once you added in gas and food and wine and everything else that came with maintaining a fiction. I sat there in the blue light of my laptop screen, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart, not dramatically like that, but something harder and more practical. The belief that I could fix this. The belief that I could keep going. The belief that there was any way out except the truth. But I didn't tell her. Not that night. Not the next day. Not that whole week leading up to the lake house weekend. Because I was a coward. And because I'd spent so long building this version of myself that I couldn't remember how to be anyone else. The lake house was beautiful. Of course it was beautiful. The photos hadn't lied. It sat right on the water. All windows and wooden beams, and that particular kind of peaceful emptiness that expensive places have. Melissa loved it immediately. She walked through the rooms, touching things gently, reverently, and she said, "I can't believe this is yours. I can't believe you've been holding out on me." And I smiled. I smiled, and I felt like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my body. Like I was a character in one of my books who'd made terrible choices and now had to live with them. We unpacked. We opened wine. We sat on the deck as the sun went down over the lake, turning everything gold and pink and impossibly pretty. And Melissa leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "This is perfect. You're perfect." I wanted to die. I wanted to stand up and tell her everything right then, to watch the perfection shatter and at least be free of carrying it. But I didn't. I kissed the top of her head and I said, "I'm glad you're here." We made dinner together in the kitchen that belonged to someone else. We drank wine that I'd charged to a credit card that was already maxed out. We made love in a bed that I'd paid $1,000 to sleep in for 2 nights. And the whole time, I felt like I was suffocating. Have you ever been somewhere beautiful and felt nothing but dread? Have you ever been with someone you care about and felt like a fraud so completely that you can't access any genuine emotion? That was me that weekend, going through the motions, smiling at the right times, saying the right things, while inside, I was just tallying up the cost of every moment. $90 for the steaks I grilled, $60 for the wine, $40 for the fancy cheese board I'd assembled. Because that's what you do at a lake house, right? You assemble cheese boards and pretend your life isn't collapsing. On Saturday afternoon, we took out the kayaks that came with the rental. The lake was calm, almost glassy. and we paddled out to the middle where you couldn't hear anything except water and birds and the sound of our own breathing. And Melissa stopped paddling and just floated there looking around, and she said, "Thank you for sharing this with me. I know you probably come here to write to be alone. It means a lot that you'd bring me here." And I said, "Of course." That's all I could manage. Of course. But what I was thinking was, I've never been here before in my life. I will never be here again. I am paying for this moment with money I don't have. I am a liar. I am a fraud. And you have no idea. That night, we invited some of her friends up. Not the plan originally. But they were in the area and she'd mentioned it, and I couldn't think of a reason to say no without raising suspicion. So James and Kendra drove up from the city, and we grilled more food I couldn't afford and drank more wine I shouldn't have bought. And they sat around talking about their jobs and finance and tech. And I just nodded along like I belonged in this conversation. Like I was the kind of person who owned lake houses and threw impromptu gatherings. James, at one point, asked me about the book I was working on. And I found myself improvising this whole plot that didn't exist. Characters I'd never created. Themes I hadn't thought about until they were coming out of my mouth. And he seemed interested, genuinely interested. And he said, "Man, that sounds incredible. When's it coming out?" And I said, "We're thinking next spring." Still working out some details with the publisher. More lies. Easier now. Automatic. Like I trained myself to live in fiction so thoroughly that I couldn't find my way back to truth. After they left, after we'd cleaned up and gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. I lay there next to Melissa, listening to her breathe, and I did the math again in my head. The weekend had cost all in about $2,000. $2,000 I didn't have, that I'd borrowed from my future self, from a version of me that I was banking on being successful enough to pay this all back. But what if I wasn't? What if the third book never came together? What if my career had already peaked and I was just too proud or too stupid to see it? What if I destroyed my financial life for a relationship built on lies that was inevitably going to end? I got up. I went outside onto the deck, and I sat there in the cold watching the lake, and I cried. Not loud, dramatic crying. Just quiet tears running down my face while I tried to breathe normally, while I tried to understand how I'd let this happen. My phone buzzed. A text from my credit card company. "Your payment is overdue." I sat there holding my phone, and I thought about throwing it in the lake, just standing up and hurling it as far as I could into the dark water and watching it sink. But of course I didn't. I just sat there until I was too cold to sit anymore. And I went back inside and lay in bed staring at the ceiling until morning. We drove back to the city on Sunday afternoon, and Melissa was happy, glowing, already talking about coming back, maybe in the fall. Maybe we could invite more friends. And I made agreeable noises while I drove the BMW I couldn't afford, back to the life I couldn't sustain, carrying secrets that were getting heavier every day. The following week, things started to unravel faster. My landlord in Queens called about late rent. I'd never been late before, not in 3 years, but I was late now, and he was nice about it but firm. I needed to pay, or he'd have to start eviction proceedings. That was the word he used. Proceedings. Like my life was a legal document being processed. I paid him from the credit card. Another $1,600. That card was now $2,300 over the limit, and the fees were accumulating like water rising in a sinking ship. Then my agent called, Beth, my agent, who'd sold my first book and was so enthusiastic about my career. And she asked, gently, too gently, how the new manuscript was coming. And I lied to her too. I told her I was making great progress, that I'd have something to show her soon. And there was this pause on the line, this weighted silence, and she said, "Michael, honey, I need you to be honest with me. Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm fine, Beth. Everything's fine. I'll have pages for you in 2 weeks." Another lie. The manuscript was dead in the water. I hadn't written anything meaningful in months. I was spending all my energy maintaining the fiction of my life with Melissa, and there was nothing left for actual fiction. Melissa wanted to meet more of my friends. She wanted to be integrated into my life, which was reasonable, which was what you do in a healthy relationship. But my real friends couldn't meet her because they knew the truth. They knew about Queens and the struggling royalties and the fact that my career was stalled. So I kept making excuses. Work deadlines. Travel. My friends are busy, out of town, not available. She didn't push it, but I could see her starting to wonder. little creases of confusion on her forehead when I dodged another invitation, a slight cooling in her enthusiasm when I'd cancel plans at the last minute because I couldn't afford them. One night in September, we were supposed to go to this gallery opening in Chelsea. One of her friends from business school was showcasing, and I showed up late because I'd been on the phone with my credit card company, begging them not to close my account. And when I got there, Melissa was standing outside looking at her phone, and when she saw me, she looked tired, just tired. She said, "You know what? Let's skip it. Let's just go somewhere quiet." And we went to a diner, her suggestion, a cheap diner in Hell's Kitchen, and we ordered coffee and pie, and she looked at me across the table for a long time before speaking. She said, "Are you seeing someone else?" And I was so surprised, so genuinely shocked that I laughed. "What? No. God, no. Why would you think that?" She stirred her coffee, not looking at me. "You're always distracted, always on your phone checking something. You cancel plans. You're vague about your schedule. You never want me to meet your friends or see where you live. I don't know what to think anymore." And here was my chance. Here was the door opening to honesty, to telling her everything, to maybe salvaging something real from the wreckage of my lies. But instead, I doubled down. I reached across the table and took her hand, and I said, "I'm not seeing anyone else. You're the only person I want to be with. I'm struggling with the book. My publisher is putting pressure on me, and I'm behind deadline, and I've been embarrassed to admit it. That's all. I promise. More lies. Easier now than truth. Automatic." She squeezed my hand. She believed me, or wanted to, and I felt relief and self-loathing in equal measure. "I wish you'd talk to me about this stuff," she said. "I wish you'd let me in." "I will," I said. "I promise I will." But I wouldn't. I couldn't. Because letting her in meant showing her everything I'd hidden, and I'd built the walls too high now to tear them down without destroying everything. October came. That Tuesday I mentioned at the beginning. The text about the lake house. She wanted to go back for her birthday, wanted to spend a long weekend there, maybe invite some more friends. And I was sitting in that leased BMW trying to figure out how to tell her that we couldn't go back because I didn't own it. I'd never owned it. I'd rented it once and nearly bankrupted myself doing it. I typed out messages and deleted them. I actually don't own that place. Delete. I need to tell you something important. Delete. I've been lying to you about everything. Delete, delete, delete. Instead, I wrote, "Sounds perfect. Let's plan it." That night, I looked into renting the same place again. It was available. $2,200 for the weekend. $2,200 I didn't have. But what choice did I have now? I tried to open a new credit card. Denied. My credit score had finally caught up with my spending. I was too risky now, too deep in debt. I looked at personal loans. The interest rates were predatory, insane. But what did that matter? I was already drowning. What was a little more water? I took out a loan for $5,000 at 23% interest. I had to lie on the application about my income. Another lie. They all blurred together now. I barely noticed anymore. My friend Marcus called during this period. I'd been avoiding him because he'd seen me with Melissa, and he knew enough about my real life to be dangerous. But he caught me on a weekday, and we met for a drink. "You look like hell," he said. Not unkindly, just stating a fact. "Thanks," I said. "How's the relationship?" "Still going strong." "Yeah," I said. "Great. Really great." He sipped his beer and watched me. Marcus is good at watching people. It's what makes him a good playwright. He sees what you're trying to hide. "You're going to crash," he said finally. "Whatever you're doing, whatever you're trying to maintain, it's not sustainable. You know that, right?" I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I just sat there holding my beer, and I nodded. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. And it was the first true thing I'd said to anyone in months. Marcus leaned forward. "Tell her the truth. Before it gets worse. Before you dig yourself so deep you can't get out." "It's already too deep," I said quietly. "Then make it stop being too deep," Marcus said. "Be honest. See what happens. Maybe she surprises you. Maybe she doesn't. But at least you'll know. And at least you'll be able to breathe again." I drove home that night thinking about what he'd said. About honesty. About breathing. About surprising myself with the courage to be truthful. And I almost did it. I almost called Melissa right then and told her everything. My thumb hovered over her name in my phone, but I didn't press it. I put the phone down and I pour myself a drink, and I sat in my apartment in Queens with the radiator clanking and the neighbors fighting, and I told myself, one more weekend. After her birthday. After the lake, house. Then I'll tell her. Then I'll make it right. Her birthday weekend came. We drove up to the lake house, the rented lake house, the borrowed backdrop for my lies, on a Friday in late October. The trees were turning, all those impossible colors that make upstate New York look like a postcard. Melissa had her window down, her hair blowing in the wind, and she was happy. So happy. And I was dying inside. We got there in the late afternoon. Same beautiful house. Same view. Same everything. Except this time I knew it was probably the last time. That this was the end of something. Even if she didn't know it yet. Her friends came up Saturday, James and Kendra again. Plus 2 others I didn't know well. We grilled. We drank. We sat around a fire pit that cost extra to use. And I watched these people laughing and talking. And I felt like a ghost in my own life. Like I was already gone and just hadn't told anyone yet. At one point, Melissa pulled me aside. We walked down to the lake, just the 2 of us, and she took my hand and said, "I love you." She'd never said it before. Not like that. Not clearly and directly and with nothing else attached to it. And I said, "I love you too." And I meant it. God help me, I meant it. But even as I said it, I knew I was going to break her heart. That I'd already broken everything good between us with my dishonesty. "I've been thinking," she said, looking out at the water, "about moving in together. Maybe next spring. I know we haven't been dating that long, but it feels right. Doesn't it feel right?" And I should have said no. I should have said, "We need to talk." I should have done 100 things differently. But instead I just held her hand tighter and said, "Yeah, it feels right." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat outside again. Same deck, same lake. The same crushing weight of my lies sitting on my chest. And I made a decision. Not a good decision. Not a brave decision. But a decision. I would tell her tomorrow, after her friends left, before we drove back to the city. I would sit her down and I would tell her everything and I would face whatever came next. I felt something loosen in my chest just deciding it. Like I'd been holding my breath for months and was finally letting it out. But I didn't get the chance. Sunday morning, Melissa's phone rang early. Her mother. Something was wrong. I could tell by the way Melissa's voice changed, went tight and high. Her father had had a heart attack. Not fatal but serious. She needed to get home to California immediately. Everything happened fast after that. Packing. Canceling the rest of the weekend. Booking flights. Driving back to the city so she could get to JFK. And in all that chaos and all that legitimate emergency, my planned confession got pushed aside. Seemed selfish. Seemed inappropriate to add my drama to her crisis. She left for California that afternoon. I drove her to the airport and hugged her goodbye and told her everything would be okay. And she cried into my shoulder and said, "I'm so glad I have you. I don't know what I'd do without you." And then she was gone, and I was standing in the airport parking lot next to my leased BMW, and I was alone with everything I'd done. She was in California for 2 weeks. Her father stabilized, recovered, but it was slow and scary. And Melissa stayed to help her mother, to be there. And we texted every day, and I supported her as best I could. And the moment for confession kept not arriving. It never felt like the right time to say, "Hey, by the way, while your father is in the hospital, I should mention I've been lying to you about everything." So I waited, and while I waited, the bills kept coming. The credit card minimum payments that I could no longer make. The lease on the BMW, that was due. The rent in Queens. The loan payment on that predatory personal loan. I started missing payments. Not intentionally, just there wasn't money. There simply wasn't money. My checking account hit 0. Then went negative. My savings account, my emergency fund that had taken me years to build, was gone. Completely gone. Consumed by a relationship I'd built on sand. The calls started. Collection agencies. Credit card companies. My landlord again, less nice this time. The leasing company for the BMW. They all wanted money. They all deserved money. And I had none to give them. I stopped sleeping. Not dramatically, not like insomnia in a movie, but I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and I'd lie there doing math that didn't work, trying to figure out how to pay for everything with nothing. And eventually I'd give up and get up and sit in the dark living room of my apartment and just exist in the quiet panic of my situation. My writing was dead. Not just stalled, dead. I'd sit at my laptop and stare at the empty page, and nothing would come because my brain was too full of anxiety and lies and consequences to have room for imagination. Melissa came back to New York in November. Her father was better, out of the hospital, and she wanted to see me, wanted normalcy, wanted to get back to her life. And I met her for dinner at a place she chose, not expensive. She was being thoughtful, not knowing that even a modest dinner was more than I could afford now. She looked tired, older somehow. Her father's health scare had shaken her, made her think about mortality, about what mattered. And she held my hand across the table and she said, "I've been thinking about us, about how short life is, how we waste so much time on things that don't matter." And I thought, she knows. Somehow she knows, and this is it. But instead, she said, "Let's do it. Let's move in together. I don't want to wait until spring. Life's too short." And I broke, not visibly, not outwardly, but something inside me shattered completely, because I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep going. I couldn't say yes and drag her deeper into my lies. And I couldn't say no without explaining why. So I finally told the truth. "I need to tell you something," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. "Hello." "Okay," she said, smiling, expecting something minor. "I've been lying to you," I said, "about a lot of things, about most things." Her smile faded. "What did you mean?" And I told her, all of it. The apartment in Queens, not Brooklyn Heights. The lake house I'd rented, not owned. The financial situation that was actually desperate, not stable. The career that was stalled, not thriving. The BMW I couldn't afford. The debt. The lies upon lies upon lies. I didn't cry while I said it. I'd thought I might, but I was too empty for tears. I just said it all in this flat, factual voice while she sat there across from me. Her face changing from confusion to disbelief to something harder that might have been disgust or might have been just profound disappointment. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. The restaurant noise went on around us. Someone laughed at another table. The kitchen door swung open and closed, open and closed. "Why?" she finally said. "Why would you do that?" And I tried to explain, about feeling inadequate, about wanting to be worthy of her, about how the lies had started small and grown beyond my control. But it all sounded pathetic when I said it out loud, weak, like excuses instead of reasons. "Did you ever think about what this means?" she asked. Her voice was shaking now, angry. "About what it means that you lied to me for months, that everything between us was built on fiction, that I told you I loved you and you just let me believe in something that wasn't real." "It was real to me," I said. "My feelings were real. But you weren't," she said. "The person I fell in love with doesn't exist." And she was right. She was completely right. She left the restaurant before the food came, just stood up and walked out, and I sat there alone at the table. And eventually the waiter came over and asked if everything was okay, and I said yes and paid for the drinks we'd ordered and left. That was the last time I saw Melissa. She blocked my number, blocked me on social media. I tried emailing her once, a long apology that took me 3 days to write, but she never responded, and I couldn't blame her. I wouldn't have responded to me either. The weeks after that they were bad. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They were some of the worst weeks of my life, not because of dramatic external events, but because of the slow, grinding reality of consequences. The BMW got repossessed. I woke up one morning and it was just gone from the street, and there was a notice on my door explaining where it had been towed and how much I owed. I never got it back. Couldn't afford to. That lease termination fee got added to the pile of debt I'd never be able to pay. My landlord started eviction proceedings. Real ones this time, with court dates and legal paperwork. I borrowed money from my parents, had to call them and admit everything. Listen to my father's disappointed silence and my mother's worried questions. They lent me enough to pay the back rent and stop the eviction, but I heard something change in their voices when they talked to me after that. Wariness, like I'd become unreliable, which I had. I sold things. My nice laptop, the one I'd bought when the first book did well. Some furniture. My watch. Anything that had resale value went on eBay or Craigslist, and I took whatever people offered because I needed the money immediately. Not for anything good, not for anything that would improve my life, just to make Minimum payments on debts that were never going to get smaller, just to keep my phone connected and the electricity on. Beth, my agent, dropped me. She was kind about it, but firm. She said, "Michael, I can't represent someone who isn't writing. And you're not writing. Maybe you will again someday. And if you do, give me a call. But right now, I think you need to focus on getting yourself together." Marcus stopped returning my calls. Jennifer checked in once, awkwardly, and I could tell she didn't know what to say to me. I'd become one of those people that former friends worry about, but don't know how to help. So they stopped trying. I got a job, not a writing job, a retail job at a bookstore in Manhattan. Ironic, maybe, but it paid $11 an hour and they were hiring and I needed money. Any money. I stood behind the register selling books I'd once dreamed of being shelved next to. And I rang up customers and I smiled and I made small talk. And then I went home to Queens and ate ramen and tried not to think about how completely I destroyed my life. The debt collectors kept calling. I'd answer sometimes, explain that I had no money, that I was paying what I could, which was almost nothing. They'd make notes in their systems and call back next week. It became routine. Background noise to my new, smaller life. I started seeing a therapist. I couldn't really afford it, but my insurance covered some of it, and I knew I needed help. Her name was Dr. Patricia Chun. No relation to Melissa. Different Chun entirely, though that coincidence felt like the universe laughing at me. And I sat in her office once a week, and I talked about shame and consequences and how to live with yourself when you've disappointed everyone, including yourself. She asked me once, "Do you think you deserve to feel better?" And I said, "No, not yet. Maybe not ever." And she said, "That's the work we need to do, because you do deserve to feel better, but not because you've earned it through suffering, just because you're human and you made mistakes and you're trying to do better now." I didn't believe her at first. It took months before I started to believe that maybe I wasn't irredeemably broken. The holidays came, Thanksgiving, then Christmas. I worked retail hours, long shifts during the busy season, and I was grateful for it because it meant less time alone with my thoughts. I went to my parents' house for Christmas, and we were all careful with each other, polite. My younger sister asked how I was doing, and I said fine, and we both knew I was lying, but we pretended we didn't. At midnight on New Year's Eve, I was in my apartment alone. I could hear fireworks from somewhere, people celebrating, and I sat on my couch with a beer, and I thought about where I'd been a year ago, the fundraiser where I met Melissa. How hopeful I'd been. How stupid. But I also thought about what Dr. Chin had been telling me, about how shame is useful when it teaches you something, but destructive when you just marinate in it, about how I could choose to learn from this or I could choose to let it define me forever. I didn't make resolutions. I didn't believe in fresh starts or new chapters or any of that. But I did decide something small. I would write again. Not because I thought I could be successful. Not because I thought I had anything important to say. But because writing was the only thing I'd ever been good at, and I'd abandoned it when things got hard. And maybe that was part of how I'd gotten so lost. So I started writing. Not every day, not with any discipline at first. But I'd come home from the bookstore and I'd sit at my laptop. The cheap one I bought used to replace the nice one I'd sold, and I'd write a paragraph, then another, then maybe a page. They were bad pages at first, self-indulgent, wallowing, too close to my own pain to have any perspective. But I kept going, because what else was I going to do? Slowly, something started to take shape. A story about a man who lies to impress someone and loses everything. Not my story exactly, but close enough that I could use the pain of it. Could mine my own worst moments for something that might, eventually, mean something to someone else. The debt didn't go away. That's important to understand. There was no miracle, no sudden windfall. I'm still paying it off now, 3 years later. It'll probably be another 5 years before I'm clear of it. Every month, I make payments that barely cover the interest, and the balances go down so slowly it's almost imperceptible. But they do go down, slowly. Very slowly. I still work at the bookstore. I got promoted to assistant manager, which came with a small raise and more responsibility and the dignity of having a title beyond bookseller. It's not what I imagined for my career, but it's honest work and my coworkers are kind and I've stopped being ashamed of it. I see Dr. Chin twice a month now instead of every week. Progress. We talk about different things now. Not just shame and consequences, but hope. Small hope. Realistic hope. the hope of someone who's been broken and is learning to function with the cracks still visible. I finished that manuscript. Took me 2 years, writing late at night after work, on weekends when I wasn't picking up extra shifts. And I showed it to Beth, my former agent, not expecting anything. Just wanting her to know I'd done the work. She read it. She called me. She said, "This is good, Michael. This is really good. Different from your first book, darker. But honestly, it feels honest." She agreed to represent me again. The book sold not for the kind of money my first book got, but for enough. Enough to pay down a chunk of the debt. Enough to feel like maybe I wasn't completely finished as a writer. It comes out next month. I'm terrified. Not of bad reviews or poor sales, though those worry me too, but of people reading it and recognizing themselves, or recognizing me, of Melissa, if she ever reads it, knowing it's about us, about me, about what I did, but I'm publishing it anyway, because the story wants to be told, and because maybe someone else who's drowning in lies and debt and shame will read it and feel less alone. Maybe that's worth the exposure, the vulnerability. I haven't dated since Melissa. Haven't tried. Dr. Chin says I will when I'm ready. But I don't know if I'll ever be ready. How do you trust yourself not to make the same mistakes? How do you let someone in when you know what you're capable of hiding? But I'm trying to be better. That's what I tell myself every day. Not perfect, not redeemed, just better. A little more honest. A little more willing to sit with discomfort instead of lying my way out of it. I still think about Melissa sometimes. I wonder how she is, if her father's still healthy, if she ever thinks about me, or if she's erased me completely from her memory the way I probably deserve to be erased. I hope she's happy. I hope she found someone who's worthy of her, someone who doesn't have to invent a version of themselves to feel good enough. Last month I saw her, not to talk to, just saw her. She was walking in Soho with a man I didn't recognize, and they were laughing about something. And she looked happy. Really happy. And I ducked into a store before she could see me. And I stood there among the racks of clothes, feeling my heart pound, feeling all that old shame and regret wash over me. But then something different happened. The shame was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something like acceptance. Like, yes, I did that. Yes, I hurt her. Yes, I was a coward and a liar. I can't undo any of it. But I'm not that person anymore. Not completely. I'm trying every day to be someone better. I left the store and walked home to Queens. Not to Brooklyn Heights. Not to some imaginary life. Just home. To my small apartment with the radiator that clanks and the neighbors who fight and the cheap furniture and the stack of bills on the counter. My real life. Not impressive. Not Instagram worthy. But mine. Actually mine. And you know what? It was okay. Not great. Not the life I dreamed of when my first book came out and everything seemed possible. But okay. Bearable. Sometimes even good. I cooked dinner that night. Nothing fancy, just pasta and vegetables. And I ate it at my small table. And I worked on some edits for the book. And I went to bed at a reasonable hour. And it was such a normal, unremarkable evening. The kind of evening I would have been ashamed of 3 years ago, would have felt I needed to hide or dress up or lie about. But I wasn't ashamed. I was just there, living my actual life. That's not much of an ending, I know. You probably wanted something more dramatic. A grand gesture of redemption. A reunion with Melissa where she forgives me and we laugh about the whole thing. Or maybe you wanted me to hit rock bottom harder. To lose even more, to really pay for what I did. But this is what I have. This is the truth. I lied about being rich to impress a woman I loved, and destroyed that relationship and nearly destroyed me. And now I'm here, 3 years later, still paying off the debt, still working a job I didn't plan for, still trying to figure out how to be a person I can respect. The scars are still there. I don't trust myself the way I used to. I second-guess every impulse to exaggerate or enhance or make myself sound better than I am. Sometimes I overcorrect and become too honest, too blunt, too eager to point out my own flaws before someone else can. That's damage too, just in a different direction. My credit score has improved, though. That's something concrete, something measurable. It's still not good, but it's better. It goes up a few points every month that I make my payments on time. I check it sometimes, not obsessively like I used to check my credit card balances when I was drowning, but periodically. And I feel something like pride when I see those numbers climb. Small pride, quiet pride, the pride of someone who's paying their debts, literally and figuratively. I've learned to sit with discomfort. That's maybe the biggest change. When I want to lie now, when I feel that old impulse to make myself sound more interesting or successful or together than I am, I feel the discomfort of just being honest instead, and I sit with it. I let it be uncomfortable, because discomfort won't kill me, but lies almost did. My book, the new one, the honest one, is dedicated to Melissa. Not by name, just for M. I'm sorry. My editor asked if I was sure if I wanted to explain more, and I said no. She'll know if she reads it, and if she doesn't read it, then it doesn't matter anyway. I don't know if that's closure. I don't know if I deserve closure, but it's what I have to offer. An apology in ink, an admission of guilt for anyone to read. Sometimes people ask me for advice now. Not often, but sometimes someone will find out I'm a writer, that I had a book that did well once, and they'll ask how to make it in publishing or how to deal with rejection or how to stay motivated when things are hard. And I never know what to say, because the truth is, I don't have it figured out. I failed spectacularly at my career and my relationship and my finances. I'm not a success story. I'm a cautionary tale who's still barely managing to keep going. But sometimes I say this, be honest, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because lies might get you where you want to go faster, but they won't let you stay there. And the fall, when it comes, and it will come, will be so much worse than just admitting from the beginning that you're scared and flawed and trying your best. Nobody's ever looked satisfied with that answer. They want something more useful, more practical, tips and tricks and hacks for success. But that's all I've got. Be honest. Show up as yourself. Let people decide if that's enough, instead of deciding for them and inventing someone else to offer instead. I think about the bookstore sometimes, about the fact that I work there surrounded by books, by all these stories of people overcoming obstacles and achieving dreams and finding redemption. And I think about how my story isn't like that. How I didn't overcome, really. I just survived. I'm still in the middle of it, still dealing with the consequences, still figuring out how to live with what I did. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that's more honest than the redemption narratives we're sold. Maybe the truth is that most of us don't overcome completely. We just learn to carry our mistakes better. We adapt. We find ways to keep going even though we're not who we wanted to be. There are good days now. That's something. Days where I don't think about the debt or Melissa or my failed career. Days where I recommend a book to a customer and see their face light up with interest. Days where I write a paragraph that feels true and good and worth keeping. Days where I call my parents and the conversation is easy, where we've moved past the disappointment into something like acceptance. Those days don't erase the bad ones. The days where I wake up at 3 a.m. doing that old math, checking account balances on my phone, feeling that familiar panic rising in my chest. The days where I see a couple laughing together on the subway and I think about Melissa and everything I lost. The days where I open my laptop to write and just stare at the empty page because I still don't trust my own voice. Both kinds of days exist. I'm learning to accept that healing isn't linear, that getting better doesn't mean the pain disappears. It just means you learn to live alongside it. Dr. Chin says I'm doing well. Not fixed, but well. She says recovery from something like this isn't about returning to who you were before. It's about becoming someone new who incorporates the lessons without being destroyed by them. I'm trying. Some days, I'm succeeding. I rode the subway home last week after a long shift at the bookstore, and I was tired, the good kind of tired that comes from honest work. And I was reading a book by an author I admire. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt content. Not happy exactly. Not proud of where I was, but content. At peace with being exactly where I was instead of somewhere else. It lasted maybe 30 seconds before I started thinking about rent and whether I could afford to get my hair cut this month and all the usual anxieties. But those 30 seconds existed. They were real. And maybe that's progress. Maybe learning to find those small moments of peace in the wreckage is the best I can hope for. So that's where I am now. That's the story. Not the story I wanted to tell. Not the story I'd write if I could go back and change things. But the story that is the true one. The one where I lied and lost everything and am slowly, painfully learning to build something smaller and more honest from the ruins. If you're out there drowning in your own lies, in your own debt, in your own shame. And I know some of you are. I can see it in your faces. I want you to know this. You can survive it. It won't be pretty. It won't be easy. There's no shortcut, no hack, no way around the consequences. You're going to have to feel all of it, pay all of it back, sit with all of the discomfort you've been running from. But you can survive it. You can come out the other side. Not whole, maybe. Not unmarked. But alive. Still here. Still trying. And maybe that's enough. Maybe showing up every day, being honest even when it costs you, doing the work even when no one's watching. Maybe that's the real story. Not the dramatic redemption arc. Just the quiet, unglamorous work of becoming someone you can live with. I'm still doing that work. Every day. Some days better than others. And I'll probably be doing it for the rest of my life. Because you don't undo the kind of damage I did. You just learn to live with it. You incorporate it into who you are. You let it teach you without letting it define you. That's all I've got. No miracle ending. No perfect wisdom. Just this. I lied about being rich to impress my girlfriend. And now I'm drowning in debt. But I'm still breathing. Still swimming. Still here. And so are you. Thank you for listening.